The war in Ukraine isn't just being fought on the ground, of course, it's also happening in the information space. Russia is churning out a nearly constant stream of fake stories to support its military aims. Our next report is the first in a series on the disinformation space. We look at how disinformation is created, distributed, and what makes a fake story most effective.
Social media is full of these images and stories. They can spread in an instant. If they find an audience, they can create confusion, fear, or confirm extreme opinions. Many of them start here, in the Russian city of St. Petersburg, at what's known as the Internet Research Agency, or IRA, also known as the Troll Factory. It's owned by Wagner paramilitary group financier Evgeny Prigozhin, seen here allegedly at the front in Ukraine as his private army shoots at Ukrainian positions. The IRA is just one agency that works along with Russia's FSB intelligence service. Also creating content are patriotic volunteers, while others, trolls and bots, spread the word on social media. The messages are intended to hit different targets or sometimes multiple targets.
Russian government and Russian propaganda machine uses all the distribution channels available to influence their own population, to influence Ukrainians, and to influence foreign audiences in the European Union, in the United States. And of course, they try to influence different audiences with different sets of messages and with, of course, with different aim. For example, they want to influence their own population to increase support of so-called special military operation, to influence people to go to the army, and now they trying to influence Ukrainians with not with pro-Russian messages, because it would be impossible to influence Ukrainians with pro-Russian messages right now, but to split our society, to create conflicts, to fuel existing conflicts, to make Ukraine's resistance to this aggression weaker. And of course, they try to influence Western communities, Western countries, population of Western countries to weaken our support.
Let's look at some examples of fake messages that found audiences. This image of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky giving away parts of Ukraine to Poland in exchange for tanks, based on no real reporting, but playing on ancient fears of Ukraine's being divided yet again. Or this message for a Russian audience, stating that the US intends to launch 5,000 Tomahawk missiles at Russia in a surprise strike, supposedly sourced from the New York Times, though no record of any such article exists on the New York Times website. Or this, alleging that President Zelensky has squirreled away a fortune, fueling long-standing stereotypes about Ukrainian leaders' corruption. This one feeds the narrative in far-right and far-left circles in the US and Europe that sending money to Ukraine is wasteful and useless, only enriching the leadership there. What makes these messages effective?
I think if I would have to choose one word that describes it, it will be subtlety. So basically, a really good piece of information is predominantly using actual facts and is either twisting them or adding something on top, or is falsifying just a bit of it. So from the first, read, from the first glance, it might seem real, and then you sort of get dragged in because if someone puts out something obscene, you can just clearly see that it's nonsense, and you just look away. But when it's subtle, when there's a variety of different actors involved, when it seems that there are a lot of different voices voicing this out, especially online on social media, if we see that there's a lot of commenting going on under a specific piece or a news media article, this could be highly effective because it just seems real.
It just seems real, and it is real to many people. Though it's impossible to measure how many people's minds are changed by disinformation, it's clear that Russia places a high value on it, and that the barrage of fake and twisted stories is not likely to let up soon.
Well, Russian state media plays a crucial role in maintaining public support for the war. But could the Kremlin eventually lose its grip on its tightly controlled narrative? Here's a look at how Russian TV has been trying to create an alternative reality out of a missile strike in Uman, in which 23 people were killed.
Russia says its army uses precision weapons only aimed at military targets. So how is their propaganda spinning this narrative? This apartment block in Uman, central Ukraine, was struck by a Russian missile. It hit at around 4 in the morning when most people were in bed. The strike killed 23 people, including 6 children. So how did Moscow respond? Russian state TV used images of the destroyed building, claiming that this devastation was actually Ukraine's fault, caused by Kiev's shelling of the Donbas region, even though this region is hundreds of kilometers away from the actual scene of the tragedy. This video, recorded by one of the victims, was exploited by one of Russia's top propagandists, Vladimir Solovyov. He shared an edited video on his Telegram channel saying that it was Ukrainians killing their own people. And while Russian propaganda outlets tried to shift the blame, the country's Ministry of Defense tried to embrace it. This photo, reading "Right on target," appeared on the ministry's Telegram channel just a few hours later. Independent polls indicate that many Russians believe the propaganda. But of course, this does not apply to everyone. After the strike on this apartment building in Uman, people all over Russia brought flowers to spontaneous memorials. The show of solidarity was not welcomed by the Russian authorities, and they were quick to remove the flowers and any messages apologizing for the attack.
Let's take a closer look then at Russian misinformation with Jakub Kalensky, who's a senior analyst at the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats. Welcome to DW. I suppose first question has to be, is Russia's disinformation campaign actually working? Is it convincing the Russian public?
Oh, I'm afraid we have to conclude that it definitely does work quite successfully, although it's very hard to put the numbers on it. Your colleague mentioned some of the opinion polls in Russia, and of course, we can't be 100% sure that the numbers are giving us the right information, according to a lot of sources. Many Russians are actually afraid to answer honestly in these polls, so we can't be really sure. But from some other, you could say, circumstantial evidence, we can conclude that many Russians do believe the official Russian propaganda. There are many testimonies that the Russian soldiers who go murdering to Ukraine, they actually parrot the official Russian propaganda that they are there to exterminate the Nazis and similar stuff. So unfortunately, we see that it works not only in Russia.
I suppose it helps, though, that there is, or it's very difficult to get an alternative view. If there's only one story being told to you, it's not unreasonable to believe it.
I think you're right, and that's why the Russian state tries so hard to eradicate all the alternative sources of real information. This is not just about shutting down independent outlets like TV Dost. This is also about the murder of Boris Nemtsov or Anna Politkovskaya or poisoning of Vladimir Kara-Murza. So the Russian state is doing everything possible to make it impossible for regular Russians to acquire solid information. However, the people who are interested, and I'm in touch with a few, they will tell you that it is possible to reach solid information, but you have to be trying actively.
OK. And what about outside the Russian media bubble? Are influential figures and international decision makers also being targeted by Russian misinformation?
They most definitely are. I mean, for the Russians, it's more cost-effective version. They wouldn't really roll the tanks into Berlin, although propagandists like the already mentioned Vladimir Solovyov, they will be talking about it. But it is significantly cheaper to try and influence the decision-making process in our countries. We have obviously many reasons to hope that they are not as successful as in Russia. On the other hand, there are many in my opinion, very optimistic takes that Russians are completely unsuccessful. And I just don't think that's true. When we have a look at some of the opinion polls that are indicated that around 20 to 30 people in various European countries believe some of the Russian lies, like that, for example, the West is to blame for the war in Ukraine, or when we see very influential figures like the Pope or Elon Musk repeating some of the notorious Russian disinformation messages, I think we have to conclude that they do find their audience even in the democratic countries.
OK, and your organisation, the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, this was established to help EU and NATO countries deal with these sorts of attacks. So what does dealing with these attacks look like? Is it purely defensive?
So our center is more on like trying to raise the level of knowledge of particular countries. And then when it comes to the more offensive measures, if you are asking about them, I'm afraid they would be more in the competence of the national governments. Right. But there are various measures that could be done. I mean, I still think that, although we have quite a few very good initiatives, my former team, EU versus Disinfo, I think they are doing a tremendous job. I think we are doing quite a good job here in Europe when it comes to the pressure on social media companies via the Code of Practice and the Digital Services Act. It still seems to me that these good practices are disproportionately weak compared to the magnitude and the strength of Russian propaganda. So I think we still need to significantly step up. Even just having a look at the amount of money that is being spent on Russian disinformation, and when you put against it how much money we are spending on countering Russian disinformation, right. The Russians are outspending us like big time, and we are not talking 10 to 1. We are talking more like several hundred to 1.
Wow. Thank you for that. Very interesting. Jakub Kalenski from the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats.
Thank you for the invitation. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Well, for more now on Russia's propaganda campaign, I'm joined by Keir Giles, author of the book Russia's War on Everybody. He's a senior consulting fellow of the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House. Keir, it's good to have you with us tonight. You wrote that Russia's propaganda success is the result of long-term investments and the skillful use of TV and social media. How far back does this go?
Yes, it's really important to bear in mind that your correspondent just described the treatment of one incident, but that one incident wouldn't succeed if it weren't for this long background, this long preparation that Russia's been building. This alternate reality has been constructed over more than a decade. In fact, if you go far back into Russia's portrayal of the outside world, it's hard to find a time where there was really an honest account of what was happening in the world around Russia and also in the country itself. The narratives that we hear coming out now from Russia about what Ukraine is, trying to convince its own population and the rest of the world about why Russia is waging this war, actually have roots that are more than 10 years old. And they've laid down the foundations for this alternative reality that you heard mentioned, where everything is spun through 180 degrees. And that has tragic consequences, of course, for people in Ukraine. If Russia tells its people that Ukrainians who believe in the existence of their own country are Nazis, then that excuses so many of the atrocities that we've seen perpetrated in Ukraine itself.
We know that the Russian media machine is controlled by the state in Russia. We know about the control that the state has on its domestic audience. I'm wondering, though, are they managing to sway decision makers abroad? I'm thinking of leaders in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia.
Absolutely. There are different campaigns for different audiences. So what Russia says to its own people at home will be different to the image that it's trying to portray to Africa, Latin America, and also different again to what Russia is saying to Europe and North America. But in each of those different theaters, again, you need to look at the long term and how the terms of conversations have changed over time. One of the biggest successes that Russia's long-term disinformation and influence campaigns has had is convincing Europe and America that you cannot offend or impede Russia or you risk nuclear war. That's been a phenomenally successful campaign that has changed the whole terms of everything that people talk about in terms of escalation with Russia, and it's been one of the key breaks on Germany, the United States, other countries providing what Ukraine needs in order to win this war.
Here in Germany, Russia has been accused of trying to engineer, if you will, political opinion by putting a new coalition together out of the far right and the far left. How's that going?
Well, it's true that Russia has more choices now in terms of who it can cooperate with in order to destabilize its target societies, the countries that it wants to subvert democratic processes in. Now, formerly under the USSR, of course, ideologically they were constrained. They had to only deal with the far left, but now they can work with anybody that will further their aims. And you mentioned television and social media. It's not just that, of course. It's working through humans as well to deliver influence, because the useful idiots, the agents of influence, the people who will foster Russian state interests to the deficit of their own countries are easily found by Russia and easily exploited all across the political spectrum.
You warned back in 2015 that NATO and the European Union cannot compete with Russia's highly developed information warfare arsenal. In 2023, is that still the case?
It wasn't so much that they couldn't compete, it's just that they were not competing. This was not seen as a contest in which the European Union and NATO were actually engaging. But all the time since then, we found both of those organizations and national governments still looking for ways in which you can actually safeguard your societies against Russia's information attacks. Now, nobody's talking about reaching back into Russia with the same kind of disinformation, the same kind of lying propaganda that Russia uses against us, because that's basically incompatible with how our societies work. But there are still safeguards that could be put in place to try to reduce the impact, that damaging impact on our democracies, on our societies, of what Russia does. And those are still not being taken.
Keir Giles, we appreciate your time and your valuable insights tonight. Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.